Across the farthest reaches of the cosmos, an unspoken agreement had been passed down through countless generations of alien civilizations: never disturb the humans. The origins of this rule were shrouded in mystery, but all knew its consequences. Even the most advanced and ancient of species, from the Dracthan to the Aristians, feared what might happen if they disregarded it. The stories passed through the stars were often whispered in hushed tones, speaking of humanity's wrath, a force so fierce it was said to have the power to change the very course of galactic history. The rule had existed long before human ships ventured into the universe, and no empire had ever dared to test it. Until now. A powerful and calculating empire, the Zorvans, came to power with ruthless efficiency, conquering world after world without remorse. They prided themselves on being the galaxy's supreme force, and like so many before them, they scoffed at the ancient legends about humans. To them, the notion of human retribution was little more than an outdated superstition. They believed they had the strength to do what no one else had dared, to bring Earth under their control. The Zorvans arrived in human space with their trademark arrogance, their massive fleets of warships blotting out entire sectors of the galaxy. Their fleets had crushed civilizations for centuries, and they believed Earth would be no different. They were prepared for swift victory, eager to claim the planet for themselves. But the humans were not so easily defeated. As the Zorvan ships drifted into Earth's orbit, they noticed something strange: silence. They broadcasted their demands to the planet below, expecting an immediate response, but all they received was an eerie stillness. The silence stretched for days. The Zorvans, unnerved but still confident, attempted to escalate their presence, yet there was still no reply from Earth. Something felt wrong. This was not the reaction they expected. Were the humans already in hiding? Or worse, had the planet already been abandoned? With no more patience left, the Zorvans sent down ground troops, prepared to take the planet by force. They had no idea that beneath the surface of Earth, a different kind of force had been waiting for them all along. The Zorvans, confident in their military might, had no idea that the humans were far more prepared than they could ever imagine. What awaited them was not a defenseless world, but a force that would turn their invasion into a nightmare. The Zorvans, secure in their belief of invincibility, began their descent onto Earth's surface. Their vast transport ships, carrying legions of soldiers and advanced weaponry, were poised to begin their invasion. They anticipated a rapid and overwhelming victory, quickly subduing any resistance they might face. Their only real concern was whether the humans would surrender without a fight or engage in a futile, last-ditch defense. They had no idea that the quiet they had experienced in orbit was the calm before the storm. As the Zorvan forces hit the ground, they encountered something they never anticipated: organized and determined resistance. Hidden beneath the Earth's surface, the humans had constructed a sprawling network of military facilities, bunkers, and research stations, each more advanced than anything the Zorvans had ever seen. The humans had been quietly preparing for something, though they hadn't expected to face an alien invasion. They had anticipated a different kind of threat, but not one that would emerge so suddenly, so dangerously close to home. The first wave of Zorvan troops barely touched the ground before they were ambushed. The humans, armed with advanced weaponry that they had long developed in secret, unleashed a barrage of firepower that decimated the invaders. The Zorvans' highly trained soldiers, known for their ruthlessness and efficiency, were stunned by the sheer violence of the humans' response. It wasn't just the weapons that confused them, it was the human strategy, their ability to adapt to every situation, every attack. In the span of just hours, the first wave was all but annihilated. The Zorvans, who had once viewed the humans as little more than an insignificant species, now realized they had underestimated their opponent. They had never encountered anything like this before. The humans were not only defending their world, they were fighting with the determination of a species that had something to protect. The Zorvans' surprise quickly turned into confusion, and then panic. The humans' guerrilla tactics, combined with their advanced technology, shattered the initial Zorvan assault. The invaders, skilled in combat but unprepared for this kind of enemy, were suddenly caught in a war they didn't understand. The Zorvans' response was immediate. Reinforcements were called in. They would not be defeated by these primitive creatures. However, as the new forces moved in, they quickly found that the humans weren't giving up. The invaders' lines of communication were already disrupted, their systems crippled by the humans' unexpected counterattacks. Every attempt at regrouping was met with swift and merciless retaliation. What began as a simple invasion was quickly spiraling out of control. The Zorvans had underestimated the humans' ability to fight back. Now, with their communications in disarray, they found themselves locked in a deadly game where every move they made seemed to bring them closer to disaster. As the days passed, the Zorvans found themselves struggling to regain control. What they had initially assumed would be a swift victory had turned into a battle for survival. The humans were relentless, striking when and where the Zorvans least expected it. The invaders were left baffled by the ferocity of their response and the unexpected ingenuity that the humans displayed. In the midst of their chaotic retreat, the Zorvans' military leadership realized something they hadn't expected: the humans were not just defending, they were fighting with the knowledge that they had the means to win. The Zorvans, accustomed to conquering worlds where populations simply buckled under the weight of their superiority, had never faced such a tenacious enemy. They were used to worlds that yielded to their might, but humans were different. Their strength didn't lie in brute force alone. It was in their unyielding spirit, in their ability to adapt and overcome obstacles, in their sheer will to protect what was theirs. The Zorvans tried again to communicate with their command ship, but their efforts were blocked. The humans' rapid strikes had destroyed vital infrastructure, and now their communication systems were in disarray. Worse still, the humans had already begun to intercept and redirect Zorvan transmissions, manipulating their own technology against them. With every failed attempt at communication, the Zorvans felt the weight of their mistakes. They had vastly underestimated Earth's ability to defend itself, and worse yet, they had underestimated humanity's ingenuity. It wasn't just about guns and missiles. It was about how the humans were able to use the very environment around them to their advantage. The Zorvans had sent troops into cities expecting to find nothing but chaos, only to realize that every building, every street, had been prepared for war. Traps, hidden fortifications, and layers of defense turned the cities into mazes of destruction for the invaders. The Zorvan soldiers were caught off guard, unable to cope with the guerrilla tactics the humans employed. Even more unsettling for the Zorvans was the realization that the human population was not as divided as they had assumed. Where they thought they might find factions and fractures within human society, they instead encountered unity. The humans fought as one, united by the shared desire to protect their homes and their way of life. It was as though every human, from the smallest child to the oldest elder, had a role in defending Earth from the invaders. The Zorvans, who had always relied on their superior numbers and technology to overwhelm their enemies, began to see their advantage slip away. The humans were everywhere. There was no place they could go where they weren't being pursued, outmaneuvered, and outthought at every turn. As the Zorvans scrambled to regroup, the humans were already 2 steps ahead. What started as an overwhelming force had become a hunted one. With every failure, the invaders' grip on Earth loosened, and they realized they were no longer the hunters, they were the prey. As the battle raged on, the Zorvans found themselves pushed further and further into a corner. They had expected to break Earth's will in a matter of days, but now, over a week into the invasion, their forces were fragmented, their morale shattered. The humans had turned their world into a fortress, and with every passing hour, the Zorvans' chances of victory grew slimmer. Their commanders, once confident in their ability to conquer, were now filled with doubt. They tried to regroup, calling in more reinforcements, but their efforts were constantly thwarted. Human counterattacks had crippled their supply lines, and their once pristine warships had become vulnerable to guerrilla strikes from below. The Zorvans couldn't get enough supplies to their ground forces, and every effort to launch a full-scale assault was met with devastating resistance. The Zorvans were used to overwhelming their enemies through superior technology, but here, they faced a foe that didn't rely on advanced weaponry alone. The humans were proving to be an unpredictable force, using their environment and their resourcefulness to exploit even the smallest weaknesses in the Zorvans' war machine. In desperation, the Zorvans attempted to break the stalemate by sending in their most elite forces, warriors trained in the arts of fear and domination. These shock troops, known as the Deathbringers, were notorious for their ruthlessness and brutality. They had been used to crush countless civilizations, leaving nothing behind but destruction and fear. But the humans met them with a tenacity that seemed beyond comprehension. The Deathbringers were initially poised to strike fear into the hearts of the human defenders, but what they encountered was not fear, it was defiance. The Zorvans had underestimated the power of human resilience. Their technology, however advanced, couldn't match the spirit of a species fighting for its survival. The humans were not afraid to fight back, in fact, they seemed to grow stronger with each passing attack. Amid the chaos, the Zorvans' supreme commander, Lord Raxthar, called for a meeting with his top generals. The situation was dire. The humans had forced their forces into retreat, and their superior strategy was taking a toll. Lord Raxthar, who had prided himself on his ability to see any victory through, found himself in a position he had never imagined, facing the possibility of defeat. "This is not possible," he muttered, pacing around the war room. "We are the Zorvans. No one can stand against us." But as he spoke those words, a sudden realization hit him. They had made a grave mistake. The humans weren't just a species to be crushed. They were a species that could adapt, evolve, and fight in ways the Zorvans could never understand. The more Lord Raxthar thought about it, the more he knew that no amount of superior firepower or military might could win this war. The humans' greatest strength wasn't in their weapons, it was in their will. The realization shook Lord Raxthar to his core. The Zorvans were not facing an army, they were facing an entire species fighting for its survival. With each misstep, the invaders were drawn deeper into a trap they had no way of escaping. As Lord Raxthar continued to grapple with the growing disaster unfolding around him, he began to realize that the Zorvans' approach had been fundamentally flawed. Their invasion had been launched with the assumption that Earth's inhabitants would be easy to subjugate. The humans, in the eyes of the Zorvans, were a primitive species, easily crushed under the weight of a superior army. But now, the Zorvans were facing an opponent that refused to bend, an opponent that fought with a fierce and unyielding resolve. The tide of the war had shifted, and the Zorvans found themselves playing catch-up, struggling to recover from the constant barrage of human attacks. They had underestimated the humans' ingenuity and determination. Every Zorvan strike was met with an unexpected counter, every plan foiled by a human move they couldn't predict. Meanwhile, on the ground, the human resistance only grew stronger. What had started as isolated pockets of fighters defending their homes had evolved into a united, organized force. The human military had mobilized rapidly, calling up every able-bodied citizen and equipping them with whatever weapons they could find. But it wasn't just their military forces that were making a difference. Ordinary humans, from farmers to scientists to engineers, had joined the fight, turning the tide in ways the Zorvans could never have imagined. The Zorvans' superior technology was still a force to be reckoned with, but the humans were proving to be a far more dangerous enemy than they had ever anticipated. They fought as if they had nothing to lose, and they weren't just defending their homes, they were defending their very existence. And in the face of that kind of determination, the Zorvans found themselves unable to break the human spirit. In a last-ditch attempt to regain control, the Zorvans launched a major assault on one of Earth's largest cities. They hoped that by crushing a symbol of human civilization, they would break the humans' resolve. But what they didn't expect was how the city's inhabitants responded. Instead of fleeing in fear, the people fought back with a coordinated fury that stunned even the most battle-hardened Zorvans. The humans had prepared for this moment. As the Zorvans advanced, they were met with a series of devastating traps, ambushes, and guerrilla attacks. Their forces quickly became disoriented, and soon, the very streets they had planned to take were turned against them. Buildings that once seemed like easy targets now became fortresses of resistance. Zorvan troops, accustomed to sweeping through cities with little effort, found themselves trapped in the very places they thought would be their victory. The tide had well and truly turned. The Zorvans, once so confident in their superiority, were now on the defensive, their once pristine military might slipping through their fingers. As the Zorvans' forces faltered and their plans crumbled, they were forced to realize the truth they had long ignored: the humans were not just surviving, they were winning. With every passing moment, the invaders were losing their grip on Earth. The Zorvans were now in full retreat. What had started as an invasion aimed at conquering Earth had turned into a desperate scramble to save what little remained of their once proud empire. The invaders, who had once believed their power was unmatched, now found themselves on the defensive, outmaneuvered at every turn by the humans. Their warships, once symbols of unstoppable force, were now battered and retreating, their crews demoralized. The Zorvans had made one fatal error: they had underestimated humanity's resolve, its ingenuity, and its capacity for unity in the face of extinction. The human fighters, whether military or civilian, had proven to be far more organized and resourceful than the invaders had ever imagined. The war was no longer about weapons or technology, it had become a battle of wills. And in this fight, the humans were proving to be unstoppable. The Zorvans, however, were not ready to give up just yet. Their leaders, desperate to salvage their empire, decided to take a drastic step. They would issue one final message, an ultimatum to the humans, hoping that they could at least salvage some form of dignity from their disastrous invasion. A broadcast was sent across all human frequencies. The voice that came through the speakers was cold, metallic, and unyielding, as it transmitted from the heart of the Zorvan fleet. It was Lord Raxthar, the Supreme Commander, speaking to the humans for what he hoped would be the final time. "We gave you a chance to surrender," Raxthar's voice boomed across the airwaves, "but you refused. Now, you will face the consequences. We will continue this war until you are crushed beneath our might. Your world will burn, and your people will be nothing but ashes in the wind." The message crackled and faded out, leaving behind an unsettling silence. The Zorvans waited for a response, hoping that the threat of total annihilation would break the human spirit, that they would finally see the futility of their defiance and bow before the might of the Zorvan Empire. But the response they received was not what they expected. Moments after Raxthar's message ended, a new signal began to broadcast across the frequencies. The Zorvans froze, unsure of what they were hearing. The voice that came through was unmistakably human, and the tone was calm, but there was a certainty in it that sent a chill down their spines. "We warned you," the human voice said, steady and unshaken. "You should have listened. You never should have woken us up." The transmission ended abruptly, and the Zorvans were left staring at their screens, unable to comprehend the calmness of the response. There was no fear in the human voice, no desperation. There was only the quiet certainty of a species that had been pushed too far, a species that was now determined to defend itself with every ounce of strength it had. With that single, chilling response, the Zorvans were left to realize that their threats had only sealed their fate. The humans were not afraid, and now they were ready to finish what they had started. As the final message from the humans echoed across the Zorvan fleet, something shifted in the air. The Zorvans, despite their arrogance and advanced technology, could feel the gravity of the moment. The threat they had issued was supposed to break the human spirit, but instead, it had fueled their resolve. That calm, confident voice had been a wake-up call, a reminder that Earth was not a planet to be trampled upon. The Zorvans' command center was filled with an eerie silence. The supreme leaders, who had once stood tall with their conviction of victory, now found themselves questioning everything they had known. They had made a fundamental error, one that even the mightiest of forces couldn't undo. The humans weren't just defending themselves, they were preparing for the final confrontation, and they were ready for anything the Zorvans could throw at them. The human response had ignited a fire within the people of Earth. The military had been joined by civilians, scientists, teachers, students, and farmers, each person contributing whatever skills they could muster. The resistance had grown into a powerful, united front, one that the Zorvans could no longer ignore. Lord Raxthar, realizing the true extent of the humans' resolve, knew that the only chance for the Zorvans to survive was to make one final push. The Zorvans, with all their might and military precision, would launch their last, desperate assault on Earth's heart. They had no other choice. The Zorvans concentrated their forces in an all-out assault. They pooled every remaining resource into one final strike against Earth. Their warships, their most elite soldiers, and all their remaining firepower were unleashed in a desperate attempt to crush the humans once and for all. But the humans, by now, had turned their own world into a battleground, a place where every inch was contested, where every street and building had become a fortress. The Zorvans' fleet descended once again, this time with the full force of their military might. Their goal was clear: to break Earth's resistance with overwhelming power, to show the humans that resistance was futile. But what the Zorvans failed to realize was that the humans were no longer fighting just to survive, they were fighting to win. As the Zorvan fleet arrived in Earth's atmosphere, they were met with a surprising sight. The humans had prepared not just with weapons but with strategies that took full advantage of their environment. Earth's cities, forests, and mountains had been transformed into traps. The Zorvans' descent was slowed by human interference, systems had been hacked, communication channels were jammed, and every attempt to regroup was countered by the humans' relentless strikes. The invaders found themselves unable to gain a foothold, their massive warships becoming vulnerable to ground assaults and aerial attacks they never expected. It was as if the entire planet had become one giant weapon, a living entity that fought back against the Zorvans with everything it had. Every piece of human technology had been adapted to fight the invaders, from simple tools turned into makeshift weapons to advanced military equipment used in ways the Zorvans had never seen before. It was not just an army that the Zorvans were facing, but a civilization in its full fury. The Zorvans' last assault, which they had hoped would be their victory, quickly turned into their downfall. Their ships were damaged, their soldiers scattered, and their control over Earth was slipping away with every passing minute. The Zorvans had become trapped in a war they could not win. Amid the chaos, the Zorvans' once confident leaders gathered in their flagship. Their empire was crumbling, their soldiers defeated, and their fleets destroyed. Lord Raxthor stood at the helm, staring out into the vastness of space, as the weight of his decisions settled on him. He had once believed the humans would bow before Zorvan power. Instead, they had risen up with an unstoppable force of their own. "We should have listened," Raxthor muttered under his breath, his voice filled with defeat. "We should have never woken them." The message that had echoed through their communications, simple, direct, and unwavering, was now the only truth the Zorvans had left to face. Humanity was no longer a species to fear in the shadows, it was a force to be reckoned with. The Zorvans, their empire now in ruins, could only watch in disbelief as Earth's defenders pressed on. The humans had not only survived, they had triumphed. The Zorvans' invasion was over, and their empire would never be the same again. The aftermath of the Zorvan invasion left Earth's surface scarred, but the humans had emerged victorious. The once proud Zorvan Empire had been reduced to nothing more than a shattered fleet, scattered across the stars. Earth, despite the destruction it had faced, was still standing, and its people had proven to the galaxy that they were a force to be reckoned with. The planet was quiet now, but it was a tense kind of quiet. The humans had fought with everything they had, but they knew the price of such a hard-won victory. The war had cost them dearly. Cities were in ruins, millions of lives had been lost, and the emotional toll on the survivors was immeasurable. Yet, despite the hardships, there was a sense of pride that lingered in the air. They had done what no one had thought possible. They had turned the tide against the Zorvans, and they had won their world back. The victory, however, was bittersweet. In the days following the Zorvans' retreat, Earth's leaders called for a global summit. The survivors of the war gathered in the great halls of Earth's united governments, each nation coming together to discuss not only the rebuilding of their world but also the future of their place in the galaxy. The war had brought humanity together like never before, but it also raised difficult questions about what the future would hold. The humans had been forced to look inward as much as they had fought outward. They had discovered strengths they never knew they had, but they had also uncovered weaknesses. Could they continue to live in the shadows of space, unprepared for another threat? What would they do if another empire like the Zorvans came knocking at their door? Would they be ready? Or would they have to face the terrible reality that they were vulnerable once again? As Earth's leaders discussed these weighty matters, a new sense of determination emerged. Humanity had not only fought to protect its way of life, it had fought to ensure that no one would ever again underestimate them. There was no question in their minds now, Earth would not be left in peace. The humans had tasted the depths of war, and they would not be caught unprepared again. The galaxy had seen what they were capable of, and the humans intended to make sure no empire ever forgot that lesson. In the days following the summit, humanity set to work rebuilding. Cities were reconstructed, resources were mobilized, and the technological advances that had helped them win the war were shared and adapted for peaceful purposes. The humans had learned hard lessons, but they had learned them well. They had learned the value of unity, of innovation, and of fighting for what they believed in. But the question remained, would the Zorvans' defeat be enough to convince the rest of the galaxy that humanity was no longer to be feared? Or would other, more powerful empires decide to challenge the Earth and see what the humans were truly capable of? Though victory had been achieved, the future of humanity in the cosmos was uncertain. The galaxy had learned that the humans would fight to the last, but the real question was, who would be the next to test their might? Months passed since the Zorvans' retreat, and Earth began to recover from the wounds of war. Cities that had once been rubble were rising again, restored by the tireless efforts of the people. Humanity's resilience was a testament to their survival instincts. Where others might have crumbled, they had rebuilt, stronger and more united than ever. The scars of the conflict were still fresh, but there was a sense of hope in the air, hope for the future and for a world no longer at the mercy of invaders. But while Earth's surface was healing, humanity's gaze had turned outward. The war with the Zorvans had shown them just how fragile their position in the galaxy was. Though they had won this battle, the universe was vast, and Earth was only one small planet among countless others. The humans knew that, despite their victory, they could not afford to remain isolated. The galaxy had seen what they were capable of, but it had also witnessed their vulnerability. If the Zorvans had come, others could as well. The next time, they might not be so fortunate. Humanity's leaders knew this, and so they began making plans, not just for rebuilding their world, but for expanding their influence in the galaxy. They began strengthening their alliances with the few other peaceful races that had once quietly acknowledged the rule of never waking the humans. These alliances were now more crucial than ever. Earth had proven itself, but it was not enough to just survive. Humanity needed to prepare for the next threat, to ensure that no empire would ever think of challenging them again. In the quiet corridors of the Earth Defense Coalition (EDC), discussions took place, not just about military might but about diplomacy, knowledge sharing, and technology. Earth would now engage the galaxy as an equal, not a fledgling species, but a force to be respected. Humanity's success in repelling the Zorvans was the foundation upon which this new era would be built. But with this new path came new challenges. Some species were reluctant to welcome humans into the galactic fold. The universe was filled with ancient powers, long established, and many of them had always seen Earth as insignificant, a backwater planet far removed from the center of galactic affairs. Now, those same powers were watching Earth closely, unsure whether the humans' rise was a threat or an opportunity. Some races were even openly hostile, looking for ways to exploit the humans' newfound strength or sabotage their efforts at building alliances. But despite the pressure, humanity did not shrink back. They had learned from their past mistakes, and they knew how to fight on multiple fronts. Their military capabilities had been bolstered, their technology advanced, and their leadership strengthened by the hardships they had endured. The Zorvans' retreat had not only given the humans time to rebuild, it had also provided them with the opportunity to take stock of their place in the galaxy. As Earth's ambassadors made their way to the farthest reaches of known space, they carried with them a message: humanity was no longer a species to be ignored. No longer would they be seen as primitive. No longer would they be vulnerable. The message was clear, and it was simple: the humans were here to stay. As Earth made its first steps into the greater galaxy, it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about ensuring that no one, ever again, would dare to underestimate them. The universe was changing, and the humans were ready to lead. As humanity began to establish its presence in the galaxy, there was a quiet sense of triumph that echoed across the planet. Earth had not only survived, but it had risen to a level of prominence in galactic affairs that no one had ever imagined. However, in the midst of this optimism, not everyone in the galaxy was as welcoming. The Zorvans, though defeated, were not the only empire to ever learn of the humans' existence. Far beyond the reach of Earth's new alliances, deeper into the unknown sectors of space, other ancient empires had been watching. These empires were not as quick to underestimate humanity. They had long histories of conflict, and their intelligence networks had already picked up the seismic waves of change caused by the humans' victory over the Zorvans. The Zoral Empire, a race of highly intelligent and ruthless beings, had been quietly observing Earth since before the Zorvans' invasion. The Zoral had their own reasons for remaining distant from Earth's development, preferring to study the planet's inhabitants from afar rather than risk drawing attention. They had known about the rule, the whispered warning of never waking the humans, and had respected it, even if it had only been based on fragmented reports and ancient myths. But the Zorvans' catastrophic defeat had shattered that quiet respect. The Zoral had watched, intrigued and disturbed, as humanity rose from the ashes of war. Their sudden and unexpected strength was a threat, a force that could destabilize the carefully balanced order of the galaxy. The Zoral knew that the humans could not remain in their corner forever. Eventually, their expansion would collide with other empires. And when that time came, the Zoral wanted to be prepared. In the high, shadowy halls of the Zoral Senate, leaders met in secret. They had seen what humanity was capable of, and they knew the time had come to act. It wasn't enough to sit back and watch any longer. The humans needed to be controlled before they could gain too much power. But the Zoral were not the only ones paying attention. Far across the galaxy, other factions had taken note of humanity's recent rise. The Drak'Than, an ancient and warlike species known for their dominance in space, began to question how Earth had managed to resist the Zorvans. The Aristians, a technologically advanced and secretive race, also monitored Earth's growing influence with caution. They too had heard the stories, but now they saw an entirely new story unfolding, one that might threaten their own plans for galactic power. The stage was set. The galaxy, once quiet and divided, was now a powder keg waiting for a spark. Earth's newfound prominence was both a blessing and a curse. The more the humans expanded, the more they attracted the attention of empires who viewed them either as a resource or a threat. Humanity, still rebuilding and recovering from their conflict with the Zorvans, was unaware of the darker forces gathering around them. The leaders of Earth continued to focus on securing alliances, strengthening defenses, and ensuring their place in the galaxy. But there were unseen hands at work, hands that had already begun to manipulate events from the shadows, seeking to control the rise of humanity before it grew too powerful. As humanity looked outward, unaware of the new threats closing in, new, more dangerous game was beginning to unfold. The galaxy's older powers were preparing for a new kind of war, one that humanity had yet to fully understand. Months passed, and humanity's efforts to integrate into galactic affairs continued. Earth, now recognized as a significant player in the galaxy, had begun making trade agreements, exchanging technology, and strengthening its alliances. But despite the optimism, the humans knew that their newfound place in the cosmos came with its own set of challenges. They had won the war with the Zorvans, but the real test was yet to come. And it came sooner than they expected. The first sign that something was wrong came in the form of a seemingly innocent diplomatic mission. A ship from Earth, carrying ambassadors to the nearby Trion cluster, had been en route to establish peaceful relations with a neutral system. The mission was simple, a courtesy visit, nothing more. But when the ship arrived at the Trion system, it was immediately intercepted by a fleet of unknown warships. These ships, sleek and formidable, bore no markings of any recognized empire in the galaxy. Earth's ambassadors were quickly detained, and their ship was boarded. The humans aboard were captured without a fight, and the Trion cluster's government issued a stern message to Earth's leaders: your presence here is unwanted. Leave or face consequences. The humans, taken aback, had no idea who these new enemies were or what they wanted. But one thing was clear, Earth's diplomatic mission had been sabotaged. The Trion cluster, once thought to be neutral, had sided with someone, or something, against humanity. It was an alarming development, one that had the potential to escalate into something far more dangerous. Back on Earth, the news spread like wildfire. Humanity's first major diplomatic endeavor had been hijacked by an unknown power, and their people were now prisoners. Earth's leaders immediately mobilized their military forces, but they knew that they needed more information before making any rash moves. Who were these new enemies? What did they want? And most importantly, what was the true scope of their power? The Trion cluster had long been a mystery to the rest of the galaxy. It was a system of isolated planets and strange, unexplored territories. Few had ventured into it, and fewer still had returned with any meaningful intelligence. To most galactic empires, it was a place of little interest, until now. As Earth prepared to respond, rumors began to circulate in the galaxy. Whispers of a new, powerful alliance, one that had been quietly building in the shadows, began to surface. Some speculated that the Zorl were behind the attack, using the Trion cluster as a front to test humanity's resolve. Others believed that the Aristians, long known for their secrecy, were pulling the strings. Whatever the truth, it was clear that Earth had just been thrust into the center of a new conflict, one that could involve some of the galaxy's most powerful and secretive races. As Earth's leaders debated their next steps, they were faced with a difficult choice: should they retaliate, risking a galactic war? Or should they try to negotiate with their captors and find a way to secure their citizens' release peacefully? But time was running out. The unknown forces behind the Trion cluster were not going to wait forever. Earth needed to act, and they needed to act fast. With Earth's ambassadors held captive and the galaxy's shadows closing in, humanity's next steps would determine not just their future, but the future of their place in the galaxy. Would they fight, or would they negotiate? Either way, they were about to face their most dangerous test yet. The situation on Earth grew more tense with each passing day. The capture of Earth's ambassadors in the Trion cluster was only the beginning. News of the mysterious forces involved began to spread, but no answers were forthcoming. Every attempt to gather intelligence on the attackers seemed to hit a wall. The galaxy, which had once been willing to acknowledge humanity's strength after the Zorvan defeat, now seemed to be turning a blind eye. Behind the scenes, however, something much darker was unfolding. The Zorl Empire, though not openly involved, had begun to move its pieces on the galactic chessboard. They had watched humanity's rise with caution, but they had underestimated the humans' resilience. After the Zorvan defeat, the Zorl leaders knew that Earth could not be ignored. The humans' defiance and military might had rattled them, but now, in the wake of the Trion incident, the Zorl saw an opportunity. The Zorvans had failed, but the Zorl believed they could succeed where their former rivals had faltered. They had been quietly building alliances with other factions who saw humanity as a threat to their long-held dominance. The Aristians, ever secretive and cautious, had also taken a wary interest in the situation. As more galactic powers observed the humans, the realization began to sink in: humanity was no longer a mere side player in the grand scheme of the galaxy. In the shadows, these disparate empires began to forge what would soon become known as the Shadow Alliance, a coalition of powerful, older civilizations who saw humanity's rise as a challenge to their dominance. If the humans were left unchecked, they could quickly rise to challenge every major empire in the galaxy. It was a threat they couldn't afford to ignore. Meanwhile, back on Earth, diplomatic talks continued in a frantic race against time. Earth's leaders, having received no response from the captors in the Trion cluster, were left with no choice but to consider a military response. They were already mobilizing their forces, preparing for a rescue mission, but deep down, they knew that any such move could lead to a full-scale war, one that Earth might not be prepared for. In an emergency meeting of Earth's top military and diplomatic advisors, the room was filled with tension. General Tessa Blake, a seasoned leader of the Earth Defense Coalition, was adamant that Earth had to respond with force. "We can't just sit back and let them test us like this," she said, her voice sharp and full of conviction. "If we let this slide, it will only embolden them." But President David Reyes, who had overseen Earth's recovery since the Zorvan conflict, countered, "We don't know who we're up against. A military response could provoke something far worse than we're ready for. Our people are already at the edge, and the rest of the galaxy is watching us. We have to show restraint." Tensions flared as the room debated their next steps. The situation was delicate. Any wrong move could plunge Earth into another war, one that could have far-reaching consequences for every species in the galaxy. But there was something deeper at play. The Shadow Alliance had already begun to move in secret, and they were watching humanity's every move, waiting for the humans to make the first mistake. But Earth had one advantage: their determination. Whether through diplomacy or force, humanity would not back down. They had already proven they could fight back, survive, and adapt to unimaginable challenges. Now, they would face their greatest test yet, the unseen powers of the galaxy, who had decided that humanity's rise could no longer be tolerated. As Earth's leaders faced a difficult decision, the galaxy's shadows grew darker. The Shadow Alliance was ready to make its move, and humanity was about to find out just how far the galaxy's oldest powers would go to crush their potential. The days that followed the emergency meeting on Earth felt like a prolonged standoff. Diplomacy was failing, military preparations were escalating, and the unknown forces holding Earth's ambassadors continued to remain silent. Earth was caught in a delicate balance between making a move that could trigger galactic war or holding back, unsure of what lay ahead. Despite the growing tension, President David Reyes held firm in his belief that diplomacy was still their best chance. "We need to know who we're dealing with," he said. "If we strike blindly, we risk starting a war with an enemy we don't even understand. We have to try one last time to reach them." But time was running out. The Shadow Alliance had already begun to tighten its grip. The Trion Cluster, which had once been a neutral zone, was now a fortified stronghold, heavily guarded by fleets of ships that blocked any attempts to enter. There were whispers that these forces were not just made up of Trion forces alone, other factions were involved, and their intentions were becoming clearer by the day. The Zoral, the Aristians, and even the Drakhthan had begun to move their fleets into position, preparing for something, but no one knew exactly what. General Tessa Blake, ever the pragmatist, argued for swift action. "We can't wait forever," she insisted. "If we let them grow stronger while we hesitate, we'll lose the element of surprise. We'll never have a better chance to take action." But Reyes stood firm. "We need to approach this carefully. If we rush in, we're playing right into their hands. We'll need to negotiate, find out exactly who we're dealing with, and what their demands are." On the third day since the initial capture, Earth finally received a communication. It was a simple, direct message, a demand. The voice on the other end was cold, and mechanical, yet unmistakably alien. "This is your only warning. Withdraw all military assets from the Trion Cluster. Cease all exploration of galactic territories outside of your borders. Fail to comply, and we will take further action." The message was a shock, an ultimatum from the unknown alliance that had been hiding in the shadows. There was no negotiation, no attempt to understand the humans' point of view. The words were final. A threat. For a moment, the entire planet seemed to hold its breath. The humans had faced adversity before, but never like this. The scale of the threat was enormous, and unlike anything they had encountered in the past. The Zorvans, though brutal, were just one species. Now they were faced with a coalition of multiple galactic powers, all of whom had been watching humanity's rise with growing concern. Humanity had survived their first battle in space, but this was different. This was not about defending their home, it was about asserting their place in the galaxy, against an enemy that saw their growth as a threat to the established order. Earth's leaders, now faced with no option but to respond, prepared to make their stand. It was clear that diplomacy had failed, and the Shadow Alliance's message was a clear declaration of war. The human fleet, newly reinforced and bolstered by their best technology, was ready. General Blake, her resolve unwavering, addressed her forces. "This is the moment we've been waiting for. The moment when we prove that humanity will not be silenced, that we will not be driven into the shadows. We are not just fighting for survival this time, we are fighting for our place in this galaxy. And we will fight to win." President Reyes, standing by her side, nodded solemnly. "This is our choice. We will face whatever comes next with the strength we've earned. This is humanity's future, and we will not back down." And with that, humanity prepared to face its greatest challenge yet, an enemy that seemed impossible to defeat, but one that had made a critical error. They had awakened the humans, and now they would learn why that had always been a mistake. With the shadows of the galaxy closing in, humanity's resolve was tested like never before. The fight for Earth's survival was no longer just about defense, it was about proving to the galaxy that humanity would never again be underestimated. The tension in Earth's command centers reached a fever pitch as the final preparations were made. Humanity had been pushed to the brink, forced to confront not just one enemy, but a coalition of powerful galactic empires. The ultimatum had been made, and now Earth had only one option: respond with everything they had. The vast human fleet, now reinforced and upgraded with technology salvaged from the remnants of the Zorvan invasion, was positioned at the edge of Earth's orbit. Every ship was prepared for battle. On the surface, people all over the world knew that the day had come. Whether it was through military service or everyday life, each person understood that the outcome of this battle would determine the future of humanity. General Tessa Blake stood at the forefront of the war room, surrounded by her most trusted commanders. The battle plan had been finalized, and the stakes were clear. They had to break through the blockade around the Trion cluster, free their captured ambassadors, and send a message to the galaxy that humanity would not bow. "The time for negotiation is over," Blake said, her voice calm but filled with unwavering determination. "We fight for our future today. We fight for every human who believes in a free galaxy. We fight for Earth." President Reyes, standing beside her, addressed the leaders of the newly formed Earth Defense Coalition. "This is it," he said. "We've always known that humanity's place in this galaxy would not be easy. We've fought for every inch, and today we fight to keep our place among the stars. This isn't just about survival, this is about proving that we belong. And we will not go down without a fight." The human fleet, under the command of General Blake, launched into the void of space, moving towards the Trion cluster at full speed. They had one goal: to break the blockade and make their way to the heart of the Trion system. Along the way, they would encounter the full might of the Shadow Alliance. The enemy fleet, a formidable force of warships from the Zoral, Horistians, and other races, stood between Earth and its goal. The humans knew this would be their greatest challenge yet. The battle was about to be waged not just in space, but for the future of humanity's place in the galaxy. As the two fleets collided in the void, the battle was nothing short of cataclysmic. Blinding lasers, missiles, and plasma blasts filled the space between the ships. Human vessels, though outnumbered, fought with the speed, agility, and ingenuity that had become their hallmark. The Zorvan invasion had shown the humans how to fight back with everything they had, and now, that knowledge was coming to the forefront. Human ships, equipped with advanced weaponry and shields that had been specifically designed to counter the tactics of their enemies, moved with precision, striking at key targets. The Shadow Alliance forces, though powerful and advanced, struggled to keep up with the relentless determination of the humans. The humans fought with a singular purpose: each ship, each soldier, was driven by the will to protect their home and their place in the galaxy. But the battle was far from one-sided. The Zoral and Horistians had been planning for this moment for years, and they were well prepared. They used every trick in their vast arsenal: ambushes, decoys, and traps designed to confuse and outmaneuver the human forces. The humans, though, adapted quickly. Their ability to improvise and turn the enemy's own tactics against them became the key to their survival. As the battle raged on, the human fleet pressed forward, slowly but steadily pushing back the Shadow Alliance's forces. In the chaos of the fight, a group of elite human soldiers boarded one of the enemy ships, infiltrating it and taking control of the vessel. They sent a signal to Earth's command, "The way is clear. We've breached the blockade." With that, the final phase of the operation began. The human fleet surged forward, breaking through the enemy lines and racing toward the Trion system. They were not just fighting for survival, they were fighting to prove to the galaxy that humanity would never again be underestimated. As the humans closed in on the Trion cluster, they had one final goal: to free their captives and strike a blow to the heart of the Shadow Alliance. The galaxy would never forget the message Earth was about to send. The battle outside the Trion cluster was reaching its climax. The human fleet, battered but unbowed, had broken through the blockade. The Shadow Alliance, once confident in their dominance, was now struggling to hold their ground. The human determination, fueled by their struggle to survive and their need to prove themselves, had turned the tide. The battle had become more than a conflict between two forces, it was a statement, a declaration of humanity's place in the galaxy. As the human ships entered the heart of the Trion system, they faced one final obstacle: the command ship of the Shadow Alliance. It was a massive vessel, a fortress in space, and the last line of defense between Earth and victory. It hovered ominously above Trion, its weapons powered up and ready for a final confrontation. General Tessa Blake, her ship leading the charge, knew this was it. "This is our chance," she said, her voice steady over the communications line. "We break through now, and the Shadow Alliance is done. We free our people and send a message to the galaxy that humanity will not be silenced." The human fleet surged forward, maneuvering with deadly precision as they approached the massive command ship. The Shadow Alliance forces, desperate to maintain control, fought with everything they had left. But the humans were relentless. They had fought too hard, endured too much, to be stopped now. As the final battle raged above Trion, humanity's elite special forces descended onto the surface, infiltrating the heart of the Shadow Alliance's operations. Their goal was clear: liberate the Earth's ambassadors and sabotage the Alliance's command structure. They worked swiftly, their training and resourcefulness evident as they breached the defenses and liberated their captured comrades. On board the command ship, President David Reyes was in direct communication with General Blake. "We have the ambassadors," he said. "Now finish this. The galaxy needs to know that humanity will fight for its freedom, forever." The decisive blow came when the human fleet, having fought their way through the final layers of defense, managed to disable the command ship's main reactor. With one well-placed strike, the heart of the Shadow Alliance's operations was destroyed. The massive vessel, once an imposing symbol of power, began to break apart under the weight of its own destruction. The victory was complete. The victory was complete. As the remnants of the Shadow Alliance fleet scattered in retreat, the humans stood triumphant. The ambassadors were safe, the Trion system was freed, and the Shadow Alliance was no longer a threat. But more than that, humanity had sent a message to the galaxy: Earth was not a planet to be overlooked. Earth was no longer a world hiding in the shadows, it was a force to be reckoned with. The survivors of the battle, both military and civilian, looked out at the stars with a sense of pride and purpose. They had won, not just because of their advanced technology or superior tactics, but because they had fought with an unyielding spirit. The galaxy had underestimated humanity before, and now, they would remember why the rule had always been in place. "We've proven that humanity will never back down," President Reyes said in his speech to the people of Earth. "Today, we stand not as survivors of an invasion, but as leaders of our own future. We've shown the galaxy that when you wake the humans, you unleash a force unlike any other." And with that, Earth's future in the galaxy had been secured. The humans had fought, they had won, and they had made their place among the stars, forever. The end. Let this message ignite your faith, rekindle your hope, and spur you to stand firm on your journey. Thank you for staying with me to the end. If this story stirred your heart, drop a like, share this video with someone who needs it, and hit that subscribe button to catch more content like this. May God's blessings overflow in your life, and I'll see you soon.